Hi, everyone. This is episode 5 in this predictive processing series, and this is probably my favorite content. I hope you like it. So, let's conceptualize several different transformational trauma approaches through the predictive processing lens. Again, in EMDR therapy, where in phase 2 we teach people skills where they will experientially use them to demonstrate that they can actually handle it, which is probably in juxtaposition to the pervasively encoded belief that they can't. Deep, present based noticing itself creates prediction error related to the expectation of what usually comes when this memory content is brought into working memory on a random Thursday outside of EMDR therapy. In addition to the other things that the bilateral stimulation is doing, it surely helps support increased present awareness when we suspect highly that precision weighting is undercounting present-based sensory information in favor of overweighting that tiny piece of the trauma-haunted generative model. BLS, in the form of purposeful motor movements or eye movements, continually reorients here, 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 right? Trauma isn't meant to be updated easily. That learning was obtained expensively or redundantly. It needs a compelling reason to change. It's compelling learning. It needs a compelling reason to change. And in EMDR therapy, other parts of the client's own nervous system provide it experientially, but they have to be here for it through deep present based, present focused noticing of the sensory state. Parts work. I know many of you watching this probably do parts work. Isn't parts work at its core relational work? In parts work, parts of us have relational experiences that are different than the expectation in the bad memories. For some of my clients, parts work is the first experience that they have with deep self listening, self attunement, and self relating. Parts work is where some repair happens. If we were born into this world of people who pervasively didn't know how to love us right, yet we were born predicting the need to be. Neglect creates the type of prediction dynamic that can't be corrected through new predictions about the sensory information. So we build our generative model around the lessons of neglect and learn to degrade present-based sensory information, sometimes erasing our whole sensory selves almost entirely. Sometimes in EMDR therapy, we use attachment figure resources, which are little more than an expedited way to do parts work. Attachment figure resources create prediction error as we imagine parts of us getting nurture or other needs met that couldn't have been met in 1974. Parts work leverages prediction error from the present based experience of doing it. Brain spotting asks clients to notice specific positions in the visual field associated with trauma. Again, attention is directed to present-based sensory stimuli, which may increase its precision weighting. Brain spotting is a process that is experientially different than the normal sequela of trauma activation that this piece of the generative model is expecting, generating helpful forms of prediction error. Psychedelics, in the context, of course, of professional therapy practice. Psychedelics allow clients to have experiences with memory content that is different than when absent psychedelics. Whether they lower defenses, lower reactivity, allow the client to interact with the memory differently than they normally do, or produce heightened precision weighting on the right now sensory information over the generative model, all of this is deeply salient and therapeutically delivered prediction error. Psychodrama. allows you to experience the memory rescripted and view it from a perspective that is different from the expectation encoded in the predictions that are going to be generated by that tiny piece of the generative model. In experiential learning, you can sculpt it, you can dance it, you can re-embody it, you can do all of those things, but the prediction error needs to be leveraged in ways that nudge updates to the generative model. The model changes because we've had experience. We've experienced enough compelling, disconfirming, present based sensory learning to compel it to. EMDR 2.0 is really cool. It works. But from a predictive processing lens, I'm not sure we need taxing working memory to explain it. Oh, Tom, you said it out loud. And I'm just going to review. Look at what I've already suggested in the series. I talk crap about Triune Brain's mama. I literally told you earlier that perception is little more than a corrected hallucination. That free will, the way we've always thought of it, is largely a trick of your predictive mind, and that our own sense of our own identities probably float on top of our predictive system the way a foam mat floats on a pool. But this, what I just said, is what's probably going to get me in trouble with some of y'all. But I'm talking right now from the predictive processing lens. And from that lens, when we think we're taxing working memory, aren't we really taxing the attentional system? Think about it. Every time you see a client have a transformational experience in EMDR 2.0, look at their change in affect. They're smiling. They're preoccupied with the thing that is taxing them rather than with the bad memory. I'm going to say that again. They're preoccupied with the thing that is taxing them rather than the bad memory. The disruptions disrupt the predictive affective sequela. The disruptions disrupt the predicted affective sequela. They've been activated hard, and we've disrupted that activation hard. Do you know what that is? It's deeply salient prediction error all day long. And it's powerful, it's amazing, and it works. And predictive processing explains it really well. Breathe, it'll be okay. I'm just suggesting it's really good news that EMDR doesn't have to become EMDR 2.0. EMDR 2.0 can be EMDR 2.0, and EMDR can be EMDR. Flash, my favorite predictive processing example in the universe. And I never mention Flash without giving credit to Phil Manfield, an EMDR therapist who developed it about 8 years ago. There are ways to do Flash reliably, predictably, consistently, fully, adaptively, and relatively safely process memories, including people with extreme trauma, people who are phobic of bad feeling, and people who simply can't slow down, be present, or notice. In the version of Flash I teach, we process a tiny bit of it at a time, and those tiny pieces add up to a fully processed memory at the end. From the predictive processing lens, do you know what a tiny, tiny piece of the generative model is? It's not that evolutionarily expensive. It's pretty easy to change or update if you give it a compelling enough reason to, with the right kinds of sensory prediction error. So what we do in Flash is we bring a tiny piece of the memory into working memory, and then we immediately have you sit with 6 5-second pleasant experiences that demonstrate experientially that that little tiny piece of the bad memory isn't happening right here, right now. It's not happening because it's not happening anywhere in your nervous system. Flash is a wash in prediction error. Remember, what we bring into working memory, the brain has to start making predictions about, and it only has two sources to do that. It has your entire interoceptive state and has your right now exteroceptive senses. And what's happening in your right now sensory system? Puppies. You're seeing a YouTube video of golden retrievers jumping up and down, chasing tennis balls in fields of hay on YouTube. Interoceptively, you're calm. And then you have another 5-second experience of that. Blink, another experience, blink, another experience, blink, experience, experience, experience that demonstrates that that little piece of the memory isn't happening right here, right now. Flash leverages prediction error to update a tiny piece of the internal world at a time. And by the end of the session, when you do it well, the pieces come together and formed a fully resolved memory with more adaptive beliefs about yourself and the world installed automatically. And those memories generalize to other things we never have to touch because that's what healing causes, regardless of how you do it. Because that's what updating a tiny piece of the generative model does, regardless of how you do it. This happens all the time in our brains. It just doesn't happen enough in the traumatized parts of our generative model when we carry a lot of trauma. Predictive processing is becoming an organizing metaphor for the brain across many fields of brain science. And as we've seen, it might be able to explain how trauma gets better across a diversity of approaches. You don't have to endorse it or its implications. You get to explain trauma any way you want as a therapist. But predictive processing is able to explain many classically hard problems. Take, for instance, dreams. If we assume that perception is little more than a sensory corrected hallucination, for a brain that never stops, dreams are little more than hallucinations that are not sensory corrected. Flashbacks may be little more than hallucinations that are not present based sensory corrected. Predictive processing can explain pain in its assorted forms. Many of your clients are in poor physical shape, like mine, likely from the physiological consequences that come from long term body budget imbalances. Cortisol is only part of the problem. But many of your clients have pain, real pain, from sources that don't show up on x rays or MRIs. Predictive processing explains that pain and all types of it are of the same type. Predictive processing dissolves the false boundary between organic and psychogenic pain because we don't experience anything as it is. We experience it as a byproduct of our predictive system. And a predictive system that's out of whack enough can cause all kinds of forms of awfulness. So, predictive processing also explains the hard problem of placebos. It's sometimes difficult to design a medication that outperforms the really powerful unconscious predictions made by your nervous system. Even honest placebos, when it's packaged in certain ways that look like medications, it can strongly shape your unconscious predictive system in the direction of efficacy. If it looks, feels, shakes like it's legit, your nervous system might generate some positive outcomes. Predictive processing easily explains many strange things that are only strange through an essentialist lens. Take deja vu, for instance. Your brain both predicts and constructs the experience of familiarity, but there isn't time for it to. Yeah, there is. Your perception of the familiarity is simply the last step in this cascade. We can think about schizophrenia generally as the tendency of some brains to dramatically reshape large swaths of their generative model of the world based on only a few errant pieces of sensory data that have become overweighted. And again, there's probably more going on with schizophrenia than that, but from this lens, it's kind of a curious way to think about it. There's also really interesting work by Mark Miller and others on a predictive processing model for addictions. Predictive processing, a brain that is wired in this way, continually strives to decrease uncertainty. And in this model, addictive substances provide a better than expected impression of having resolved the uncertainty and contradictions held in both the generative model and in the sensory system. They give the nervous system the impression that all of this uncomfortable uncertainty has been suddenly and saliently resolved, even though no actual uncertainty was reduced and no updates to the generative model occurred, except to reinforce the impression that the substance is great at resolving uncertainty. So, how do we explain this to ourselves and our clients? How do we explain to someone that they have a model of everything that they've ever been through in their head and that they experience the world largely through that model rather than through what's happening right here, right now? And I think of all the people on the planet, trauma clients might be able to get it. They live firsthand with this duality between their internal reality and how many people around them live. We need to find language for this that is non pathologizing. What about the part of this where trauma symptoms may result from an overweighting of the trauma haunted internal model over the current sensory experience? Again, there might be a generally receptive audience here among your traumatized clients. Now, in order to heal, we need to access a piece of the trauma haunted internal model and encourage you to have different kinds of sensory experiences than you normally have that allow you to update that tiny piece of the model. This may be a little harder for them to get their minds around because most people with a lot of trauma haven't done a lot of transformational and experiential healing. That part may be a little bit weird for them, but it almost always is as we ask clients to move in ways opposite our culturally intuitive strategies. So, related to that, if this does sound weird, why don't we acknowledge that many of the things that we've been doing forever don't actually work? So we're developing a new logic for what does work that's built around experiential learning that asks us to attend to specific things to create experiential discrepancy. The classic trauma management strategies shaped by our broader cultures make sense, but they don't work. Avoidance is a goose chase when what you need to avoid are the problematic belief structures that you hold about yourself and the world. You can disattend to the world only so much and still find yourself in it. Trauma related rumination is little more than dissociating into your trauma haunted internal world, creating new, awful, and reinforcing experiences. For 130 years since Freud and Breuer, we've been told that you have to go to therapy and have a certain type of catharsis to heal. But the type of catharsis matters. It needs to promote the right kind of prediction error and not just cause re experiencing. The things that allow us to survive may not be the same things that allow us to heal. My point is that experiential healing is culturally weird, and that's not by accident. The same cultures that wound us heavily shape what we're allowed to count as wounding. The same cultures that wound us fill our generative model with cultural intuition about which therapies are weird and which make sense. So while we're out here reconceptualizing what a brain is and how it works, maybe we should first get comfortable with saying very clearly and out loud that whatever's going to help you heal is probably going to be something different than what makes cultural sense to you. You can endlessly do what doesn't work and stay sick, or you can pick your weird. And EMDR is a great weird way to heal. So I want to give a few bullet points about how psychoeducation around the predictive processing model might look. Just some bullet points. So, first, your past is present, and this is true for everyone, including those who are healthy and happy. Your right now perceptions, thoughts, feelings, and actions begin with the model of the world that is inside you, not the reality of your right now world. And most of what makes it difficult for you to be you happens in tiny fractions of a second, every handful of milliseconds that your brain is alive, which means that remarkably little of this is conscious and under rational control. Bullet point two, you're not responsible for how childhood shaped your mental model of the world, but you're the only one who can update it, which makes you somewhat responsible. Your internal model of the world will absolutely feel true. Everyone's does. But does it work for you? Is there room in it for you to live with peace? You can start to change your perceptions, thoughts, feelings, and actions by updating the mental model of your world that your brain holds. And we do this experientially by purposefully leveraging present-based sensory prediction error. If trauma has heavily impacted your model of the world, the model may have attempted to protect itself from constant, unresolvable, and intolerable uncertainty by disattending to present sensory based information and overweighting the information in your mind. Your internal model of the world was built experientially, and it's been changing experientially in every handful of milliseconds that you've been here. There's no question that it can change. There's no question that you can. But the parts of it that were heavily shaped by trauma aren't meant to be updated quickly or easily. That learning was saliently gained and redundantly experienced. The more there is, the more heavily reinforced that learning was. The smaller piece of it that we're probably going to need to focus on at a time. Since the only things we can use to update it have to come from present-based sensory error. If we touch too much and you're flooded, the present-based sensory information may align with the predictions in the trauma and confirm it rather than disconfirm it. We can expect that the process of learning to have new and different present-based sensory experiences will feel non-intuitive and may not feel safe at first. We often feel horrible when we have experiences that are congruent with our trauma. We may also feel horrible when we initially attempt to create experiences in therapy that leverage prediction error. But we heal across experiential mismatch. We heal across internally resolvable prediction error that updates small parts of the internal model. An updated model of the world will generate a new cast of predictions, which will shape new perceptions, thoughts, feelings, and actions. Some of this sounds like CBT, and some of this sounds like EMDR, but CBT might not have appreciated enough the deep, deep role of present-based sensory experience and how to attend to it. I'd argue that that's what we get right as EMDR therapists. And as you can tell, the predictive processing model is really good news for EMDR therapy. It's good news for all the somatic or experiential therapies that leverage informational, somatic, and temporal discrepancy. I'm arguing that we need to be about it. EMDR therapists have witnessed thousands of times the healing that cognitive neuroscientists, computer scientists, and infant learning experts speculate about and discuss among themselves. We need to be at that table too. So, to develop new metaphors around predictive processing, we need to set the groundwork for a brain that is wired in this way. And here's what some of that groundwork might sound for a brain wired for prediction. Your brain, all of it, was built to process information. Your brain is always on and is always changing. Your brain is making its best guess about what's happening right here, right now, and that guess is corrected and potentially updated primarily by your senses. We need to help you update your internal model of the world so that your prediction system can make better predictions. When we have experiences over and over that conflict with our core needs, we learn to survive the distress of that unresolvable situation by shifting how we attend to that uncertainty. Those different ways of attending show up in the many forms of dissociation, mood issues, behaviors that may not ultimately serve us, and thoughts about ourselves and the world that are limiting in our present context. We heal a little bit at a time in therapy by changing what we attend to. I will show you how to change your relationship with the present, with your awareness of the sensations in your body, and with where you purposefully focus when we do this work. This is just the beginning, but we're doing it using the only levers we have in this moment to affect change. We're doing it to help you update the learning in your nervous system by shifting how we attend to your present focused sensory systems. So, thank y'all for going on this journey with me. This is the end of the series, but it is the beginning of what I'm going to be all about probably for, I don't know, for a long, long time. So if you're interested in learning more, read Andy Clark, Andy Clark's The Experience Machine. Also, Lisa Feldman Barrett. Lisa Feldman Barrett's How Emotions Are Made. Those are pretty good um, research heavy references. The reference sections of both of those books just include hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things that can help you begin the journey. I'm also doing a book club in which we are reading both of those books. The book club is free. It's going to be in the notes wherever this is distributed. So it's a predictive processing book club with Thomas Zimmerman. Again, the link will be wherever this podcast is showing up. So again, be in touch. Let me know what you think of all this. I think this can be a helpful way to really allow us to do what we need to do and potentially even learn how to do it better, how to be better and better and better in helping to make therapy leverage what the brain, all of it, is always and already doing to help us. So thanks a lot. Be in touch. Be in touch. Take care. Bye bye.